The first lie they told me was that my name, Ilara, meant star bright in some forgotten tongue. The truth, I learned much later, was that they'd plucked it from the spine of a fantasy novel Helena had been reading in the hospital. It was a name for a changeling, a footnote in someone else's epic. It was fitting. The final lie came on the evening of my 28th birthday, delivered cold and sharp as the autumn wind whipping off the Maine coast. The free ride is over. My father, Marcus, didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes were fixed on the television, where the flickering blue light of a game show danced across his stony face. In his hand, a tumbler of cheap whiskey sweated onto the worn arm of his recliner. He spoke the words as if he were commenting on the weather, a casual final judgment that hung in the air between us. My mother, Helena, stood by the doorway to the kitchen, a dish towel twisted in her hands. She was a master of weaponized silence, and tonight her silence was a fortress. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Her refusal was its own kind of violence. A suitcase, my suitcase, sat by the front door. It wasn't my packing, it was theirs. A curated collection of my oldest clothes and a few paperbacks they deemed disposable, an eviction notice in nylon and zippers. I had just walked in, the chill of the port blossom night still clinging to my coat. In my hands was a small square box from the town bakery, the one thing I'd bought for myself. Inside sat a miniature carrot cake with cream cheese frosting and a single unlit candle pressed into its center. A pathetic little monument to a day they had chosen not to celebrate, but to terminate. What are you talking about? My voice came out as a whisper, swallowed by the drone of the television. I pay the mortgage. A contribution, Marcus grunted, finally tearing his eyes from the screen to pin me with a look of pure contempt. A pittance for the roof over your head. You're 28 years old, Ilara. It's pathetic. We're done carrying you. Carrying me. The words hit the air and shattered. I thought of the electric bill, paid from my account 2 days ago. I thought of the plumbing service I'd called last month when the pipes under the sink burst, a bill I'd covered with my overtime pay. I thought of Marcus's gambling debts, which I'd quietly erased with the money I had been saving for a down payment on a car that wasn't 20 years old and prone to rust. I thought of the endless, silent sacrifices that had kept this decaying house from collapsing in on itself, from swallowing them whole. Somehow, I was still the freeloader, the disposable daughter. But the most devastating blow wasn't the eviction itself. It wasn't the suitcase packed with my own discarded history. It was the chilling, sudden clarity of it all. This wasn't a drunken whim or a sudden burst of anger. This was a calculated execution. They had waited for my birthday, the one day that was supposed to be mine, to sever me from their lives. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had tried to unperson me. They thought that by pushing me out the door, they could erase the ledger of their debts. They were about to learn that ledgers have a way of balancing themselves. Sometimes, the most brutal storms don't come to destroy you. They come to clear the path. I looked from my father's sneering face to my mother's rigid back, and the sadness that should have been there was replaced by a terrifying, Arctic calm. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. The part of me that craved their love had just been executed, and in its place, something new and cold and sharp was born. Okay, I said. The word was small, but it felt like the heaviest thing I had ever lifted. Marcus actually smirked, a flicker of victory in his eyes before he turned back to the television. He'd won. Helena flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders, but she did not turn around. I walked to the front door, my movements feeling distant and disconnected, as if I were watching a stranger in a movie. I didn't touch the suitcase. I simply opened the door, letting in a blast of salt-laced wind that smelled of wet leaves and the coming winter. I placed the small cake box on the floor of the porch, just outside the threshold. Then I turned back and looked at them one last time. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered to the silent, flickering room. I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot in the sudden quiet of the night. I didn't take the cake. I left it there as an offering to the ghosts of a family that had never really existed. The house was never a home. It was a debt. And tonight, I was finally declaring bankruptcy. For a long moment, I stood on the cracked concrete of the porch, the wind tearing at my hair. The world felt vast and terrifyingly empty. My car, a rust bucket of a sedan, was parked down the street, containing a duffel bag of essentials I'd been secretly stashing for weeks. A small, cowardly part of me had known this day was coming. I just never thought they would be the ones to pull the trigger. Instead of walking to my car, I turned and walked around the side of the house, my feet silent on the overgrown grass. The familiar scent of rot and damp earth filled the air. My bedroom window was dark. It was on the ground floor, the lock flimsy and old. It took me less than 10 seconds to pry it open with the edge of my house key. I slid inside, landing silently on the worn, faded rug of my childhood room. The air was stale, thick with the scent of unspoken resentments. For years, I had been their invisible pillar, the silent partner holding up their fragile world. They thought that by casting me out, the pillar would simply vanish, and the structure would remain. They had forgotten one crucial detail. I wasn't just the pillar, I was the foundation, and I was about to pull the first brick. My laptop was tucked under my bed. I pulled it out, the cool metal a comfort against my trembling hands. I sat on the edge of my mattress, the springs groaning in protest, and flipped it open. The soft glow of the screen illuminated my face, casting long shadows against the wall. My fingers found the keyboard, moving with an instinct born of years of quiet responsibility. First, the local power company's website. My name was on the account. My debit card was linked for autopay. I had set it up years ago after one of Marcus's oversights had left us in the dark for 3 days in the dead of January. He'd never bothered to thank me. He'd only complained about the cost of the reconnection fee, which I had also paid. My cursor hovered over the button. Cancel service. A memory flashed, hot and unwelcome. Me, at 16, standing on a rickety ladder in the pouring rain, hammering down shingles after a storm tore a hole in the roof. Marcus had been inside, watching a football game, shouting encouragement from the dry warmth of the living room. "That's my girl, handy, just like her old man." He hadn't lifted a finger. I clicked the button. A confirmation window popped up. Are you sure? Was I sure? Was I sure that I was done being their unpaid, unappreciated laborer? Was I sure that I was done setting myself on fire to keep them warm? Another memory. Helena, crying in the kitchen after crashing her car. The insurance had lapsed, another one of Marcus's oversights. I'd drained my savings account, the money I'd earned from 2 summers of scooping ice cream on the pier, to buy her a used replacement so she could get to her part-time job at the library. Her gratitude had been a fleeting pat on my hand and the words, "You're such a good daughter, Ilara." The phrase had felt like a reward then. Now it felt like a cage. I clicked confirm. One by one, I moved through the digital architecture of their lives, an architecture I had single-handedly built and maintained. The water bill, the gas company, the high-speed internet that fueled Marcus's online poker games, and Helena's endless streaming shows. My name was on every account. My money was the lifeblood. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each click was a clean, surgical cut. I felt a grim, exhilarating power humming in my veins. This wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. It was the universe rebalancing its books. I moved to the joint bank account. the one Helena had insisted we open for family emergencies. Over the years, I had been the only one to deposit into it. They had only ever withdrawn. With a few keystrokes, I transferred the remaining balance, every last cent, into my own private account, one they didn't know existed. The final item was the insurance. Their cars, their house, all bundled under my policy because my clean record gave them a better rate. I navigated to the portal and found the option. Remove a vehicle. Marcus's rusting pickup truck, gone. Helena's sedan, gone. I closed the laptop with a soft, final snap. The silence in the room felt different now. It wasn't the oppressive silence of before. It was the clean, stark silence of a blank slate. Downstairs, I could hear the canned laughter of the sitcom Marcus was watching. I imagined him there, oblivious, sinking deeper into his worn recliner, secure in the world I had provided for him. I wondered how long it would take. An hour, a day. How long until the lights flickered and died? How long until the water ran cold in the pipes? How long until the silent, comfortable world they had taken for granted collapsed around them? I wouldn't be there to see it. I slipped back out the window, pulling it shut behind me. The wind had picked up, and it felt like it was scouring me clean. As I walked down the darkened street toward my car, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see but a hollowed-out shell of a house, a tomb for a family that had died long before tonight. The first call came at 7:15 a.m. I was on the floor of my friend Sloane's apartment, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, staring at the unfamiliar water stains on her ceiling. My phone buzzed against the hardwood, a frantic, angry vibration. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text. "The power is out. Call me." Then another. "Ilara, this isn't funny. The water is off." And a third from my father. "Whatever game you're playing, you'd better end it now. You will regret this." Sloane emerged from her bedroom, a steaming mug in each hand. She had taken me in without a single question last night, her small, cluttered apartment a sanctuary of unconditional acceptance. She handed me a mug, her expression a mixture of concern and grim satisfaction. "And so it begins," she said, her voice raspy with sleep. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and strong, and it felt like an anchor. "They're panicking." "Good," Sloane said, settling onto the floor beside me. "Panic is the price of admission for a wake-up call." The voicemails were a masterclass in manipulation. Helena's voice was the first one I listened to, thick with a manufactured sob. "Ilara, honey, I don't know what we did, but please, this is a mistake. We can fix this. We're your family." The word family sounded obscene coming from her lips. The freeloader of last night had been hastily rebranded into the cherished daughter now that the Wi-Fi was down. The day unspooled in a series of desperate, escalating attacks. My cousin, Leo, who had escaped Port Blossom years ago, sent me a text. "Heads up. Aunt Helena is calling everyone, saying you had a psychotic break and ran away after stealing their money. The smear campaign had begun. They weren't trying to get me back. They were trying to destroy my reputation before I had a chance to build my own narrative. They were salting the earth so nothing could grow in my absence." That afternoon, Sloane dragged me out of the apartment. "You can't hide," she said, pulling me toward the annual Port Blossom Autumn Festival. "You have to let them see you're not broken." The town square was a sea of flannel shirts and pumpkin spice everything. The air smelled of fried dough and dying leaves. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. And then I saw him. Marcus was holding court near the pie judging table, his voice loud enough to carry. He was playing the part of the heartbroken patriarch, his face a mask of weary grief. "To be abandoned by your own flesh and blood," he declared to a small, rapt audience of neighbors. "After everything we gave her, sacrificed for her, this generation has no loyalty, no gratitude. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt the old instinct rise up, the urge to shrink, to disappear, to take the blame just to make the confrontation stop. But Sloane's hand on my arm was a firm, grounding pressure. "Don't," she murmured. "Let him dig his own grave." And so I stood my ground. I didn't approach him. I didn't shout. I simply existed in the same space, my presence a silent contradiction to his lies. And as I watched, I started to hear the whispers from the crowd, the seeds of doubt in his carefully crafted performance. "Didn't Alara pay for their new roof last year?" I heard Mrs. Gable from the post office murmur to a friend. "Heard she's been covering their mortgage since she got that job at the accounting firm," another voice added. "Marcus hasn't worked a steady job in years." The town had a long memory. They had seen me mowing the lawn while Marcus drank on the porch. They had seen me shoveling the driveway after a blizzard while Helena watched from the window. They had seen, but they had never spoken. His lies were giving them a reason to. The tide of public opinion, I realized, was a slow but powerful thing, and for the first time, it felt like it might be turning in my favor. Later that evening, the backlash found its way online. Marcus, emboldened by the public performance, posted on the town's community Facebook page. It was a long, rambling screed about the heartbreak of raising an ungrateful child, ending with a plea for prayers for him and his ailing wife. For a moment, the sheer audacity of it stole my breath. He was writing my story, casting me as the villain in a tragedy of his own making. Sloane looked at me, her eyes fierce. "Are you going to let him?" I stared at the screen, at the comments of sympathy and condemnation starting to pile up beneath his post. The old Alara would have deleted her account, run from the fight. But the old Alara was gone. I went to my laptop and opened a folder I had labeled simply The Ledger. Inside was my insurance policy, my truth. Years of meticulously saved bank statements, scanned receipts, emails from utility companies, screenshots of online payments. Proof. Undeniable, quantifiable proof of the life I had financed for them. I didn't engage with his post. I didn't comment. Instead, I spent the next 3 hours building a simple, clean website. The header was stark. The Port Blossom Ledger and accounting. I created tabs: mortgage, utilities, medical, household repairs. Under each tab, I uploaded the corresponding documents, blacking out my personal account numbers, but leaving the names, dates, and amounts crystal clear. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a financial audit. It was cold, hard, and irrefutable. For the final entry, I wrote a single sentence. This is not a story of abandonment. This is the record of a debt being called in. I posted the link to the website as a standalone post on the community page. No commentary, no anger, just the link. And I waited. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my phone began to light up, not with calls from them, but with notifications from the community page. First, a few clicks. Then the comments started. Oh my God. I remember seeing her on their roof that time. He made her pay for his dental implants. Who does that? The narrative shattered. The foundation of their victimhood crumbled into dust under the weight of 1,000 PDFs. People who had offered Marcus prayers were now tagging him, demanding an explanation. His allies fell silent. The entire town was witnessing the public autopsy of a lie. The first panicked call from Helena came an hour later. "Alara, please take it down. People are saying terrible things. You're humiliating us." "You humiliated yourself, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I just provided the receipts." I hung up before she could reply. Then came the lawsuit. A uniformed officer delivered the papers to Sloane's door 2 days later. They were suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and, the most laughably absurd charge of all, theft of services. They claimed my sudden departure had left them financially and emotionally destitute. For a fleeting second, fear spiked in my chest. But it was quickly replaced by a weary resolve. I called a legal aid society in Portland. I calmly explained the situation and emailed them the link to my website. The paralegal on the other end was silent for a long moment after reviewing it. "Miss," she finally said, her voice filled with a stunned sort of respect, "they don't have a case. In fact, I think you have a very strong case for years of financial exploitation." The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. They had tried to bury me, but they didn't realize I was a seed. The legal battle was shorter and more anticlimactic than I had imagined. Faced with a countersuit for financial exploitation and the mountain of evidence I possessed, their lawyer advised them to drop the case. They did so quietly, without another word. The war ended not with a bang, but with the silent, rustling sound of a withdrawn legal filing. With the threat gone, a strange, unnerving quiet settled over my life. I found a small apartment above a bookstore downtown, a place with drafty windows that overlooked the harbor. The rent was more than I was used to paying, but every dollar was my own, earned for myself, spent on myself. The freedom was dizzying. I filled the space with mismatched second-hand furniture, a faded velvet armchair, a wobbly dining table scarred with the history of other people's lives. I painted the walls a pale, misty gray, the color of the ocean before a storm. It was a space built not from obligation, but from choice. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of my boxes, I found the single candle from my birthday cake. I had taken it from the porch that night, a tiny, forgotten piece of wreckage. I held it in my palm, this small token of my own survival. It no longer felt like a symbol of what I had lost. It was a monument to what I had endured. I placed it on the windowsill, where it caught the afternoon light. Life in Port Blossom became a series of quiet discoveries. The taste of coffee sipped in silence in my own kitchen. The joy of buying a new book without calculating its cost against someone else's needs. The peace of walking by the water. The salty air, a clean, constant presence. I learned that family wasn't a chain forged by blood, but a tapestry woven from threads of respect, kindness, and mutual support. My family became Sloan, who brought me soup when I was sick. It became Leo, who called just to see how I was doing. It became the quiet nod of understanding from Mrs. Gable at the post office. One evening, a card appeared under my door. There was no return address. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar, elegant and slanted. It read, "A cage is still a cage, even if the bars are made of love and guilt. I'm glad you learned how to fly." I never found out who sent it. It didn't matter. The message was a confirmation of a truth I was finally beginning to understand. My worth was not determined by my usefulness to others. It was inherent. It was absolute. That night, watching the fishing boats return to the harbor, their lights bobbing like fallen stars on the dark water, I thought of my parents. I felt a pang, not of anger, but of a deep, sorrowful pity. They would continue to live in that decaying house, trapped in their own bitterness, their world shrinking with every passing day. They had chosen the house over their daughter, their pride over their own potential for healing. They had evicted me from their home, but in doing so, they had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to build my own. Sometimes, walking away from the four walls that raised you is the only way to come home to yourself. You are not a renovation project for anyone else's broken life. You are your own foundation, your own architect, and your own safe harbor. And the light you find inside yourself, once you finally give it permission to shine, is brighter than any star.